Imagine a young man, only 22 years old, deciding to retire from his sporting career because he was simply too good. That's what happened with one of the most talented chess geniuses who was just born in the wrong generation.
Because he essentially quit chess. There was no competition for him. He spent probably the last 15, 20 years of his life just doing nothing.
In this video, I will show you some of my favorite and most insane Paul Morphy games, starting off with this incredible game he played against his uncle. Paul gave him an entire rook advantage from the start for the chances to be equal, and he was only 12 when this was played. Morphy started with e4, and Black responded with e5. Both sides developed their knights, and Paul strikes in the center with the move d4, the Scotch game, without the rook. White chose this opening because he was already down material, so his only hope was to open up the position and attack with his pieces. That's why, after Black captured on d4, Morphy developed his bishop, ignoring the loss of his pawn. And after the check on b4, Morphy gave up another pawn to gain a strong activity. Now both of his bishops are perfectly placed. His uncle, who was an amateur, made a first mistake by retreating the bishop to its starting square with the idea of protecting the b7 pawn. This move is bad because there are plenty of ways to protect the pawn, for example, by developing the knight. He goes for the move e5, preventing Black's knight from developing on f6, which will delay Carpenter's development. Black responded with d6, and Paul developed his rook to e1, putting another piece into the attack. But now, Morphy's uncle made a crucial mistake by capturing on e5, and in a moment, you will see why. Paul's uncle knew that if the queens would trade, White's attack would most likely be stopped, but Morphy's genius calculated everything from this position. Knight captures on e5. Black took the queen following his idea, but he didn't expect this. Bishop captures on f7. Black placed his king on e7 because he did not want to get his queen captured with a check, but now, knight to g6, double-checking the king. Paul's uncle didn't want to get checked after going on the d-file, so he captured the bishop, assuming it's free. He was shocked when the young genius took on h8, mating him in one of the most beautiful ways ever. But this game is still nothing compared to the other two I will show you in a moment, beginning with the legendary and well-known opera game. This game took place in France in 1858, when Paul was invited by Duke Karl and Count Isouard to an opera theatre. They scheduled the game during one of the performances, which left Morphy unhappy as he couldn't enjoy the show. He decided to wrap up the game, resulting in one of the most beautiful combinations analyzed to this day. Morphy started with e4, we have e5, and knight to f3, and Black plays the Philidor defense. Paul attacks the center with the move d4, and we have bishop g4 pinning the knight. He takes on e5, which forces Black to take on f3 because otherwise White would win a pawn. Morphy captures on f3 and develops his bishop to c4, creating a checkmate threat, and at this point he is already winning. Knight to f6, and Paul plays queen to b3, attacking two weak pawns at the same time. Black decided to protect the pawn near king, because after Morphy would take on b7, Black doesn't actually lose the rook. Queen to b4 saves the position, and White would be only up one pawn. That wasn't enough for Paul Morphy. He wanted to watch the performance as fast as possible, so he decided to develop his knight, which is a very strong move, because now capturing on b7 is a real threat, and White activity is way better. Black plays c6, protecting the endangered pawn with his queen, but now White pins the knight, and after b5 the brilliancy begins. Knight captures on b5. This sacrifice works only because Black's pieces are either pinned or undeveloped, and it is really hard to protect Black's king in this position. But Black accepts the challenge, and he plays knight to d7, to which Morphy responds by castling longside. Now his rook is creating pressure, and Black is defending, but Paul was prepared for everything. Rook takes d7, and after Black took with his rook, White adds another piece into the pin. Duke Karl and Count Isouard thought they should trade queens to prevent the attack. They thought after taking the rook, the knight could simply capture, but they didn't expect this. Queen to b8, sacrificing the entire queen to deliver this beautiful checkmate. But this last game is probably why you clicked on this video, because it ended with one of the rarest and most insane checkmates. The game was played against Paul and his uncle, Alonso, who was a decent chess player. And again, he played without a rook. This time, Morphy played e4, and after standard opening moves, he went for an Italian-like position. After he played knight to g5, Alonso played d5 and entered into the famous fried liver attack. This position is of course very well known and right now considered a trap for beginners, but 160 years ago, they didn't have much theory books to study from, and this type of games weren't unusual if you don't know what I am talking about. In this position, Morphy can just sacrifice his knight on f7, because we have queen to f3 checking and attacking the knight at the same time. The only move for black is to place his king almost in the center of the board, which is very dangerous. And it gets even worse. Morphy can just develop his knight, putting pressure on d5 at the same time because the knight is pinned. In this position, black is completely fine with giving up his knight by playing knight to d4, because he is still up material and white's queen will be under attack. Paul simply captured the piece, and even though this position is completely losing for white, for Morphy, it's just great because, with his aggressive style of playing, his opponent king in the center sounds like a dream. But the way he finished this game stunned everyone. He starts with queen to f7, closing black's king and threatening knight to e5, checkmate. Bishop e6 attacks the queen and knight e4 is not a checkmate anymore because the bishop is not protected anymore. Morphy captured the bishop and then checked on e4, which forced black's king to take over the center, and they definitely are not playing king of the hill. Now Paul gives up his knight for a moment, but he captures Alonso's knight in return, and his uncle responds with queen to d4. We have queen to g4 and king to d3. The king is coming lower and lower towards the first line, and after queen to e2, Alonso goes on d2 and then discovered check. And the greatest finish arrives. King captures the bishop and Paul castles, checkmating his opponent in one of the most beautiful ways ever. Around 1860, Morphy decided to quit chess because he stated that he had beaten everyone worth playing. From that time on, Morphy barely played chess, and when he did, he often gave his opponents a pawn advantage and played as black. He never succeeded as a lawyer, and most of the people who visited his office just wanted to talk about chess with him. He died in 1884 at the age of 47 due to a stroke. He was never officially crowned as the world chess champion, but for many, he is considered the first unofficial champion of the world.